So that was great, but what we want is to run all of this in a Docker container. So we've got an issue for it. Let's go. One add Docker file. This is going to be a monolithic Docker file, which means everything is contained in one file. I know that sounds terrible, I hear you say, but it's also simple, and simple is really nice, especially when a piece of software isn't particularly large or a company isn't very large. So let's start with a example. We're going to put supervisor D in there as the process manager. I think we have a example here. Yes, let's work off this example. So the idea is we'll have one process, which is the application, web application. Another one is a worker, the cellery worker, and then another one will be redis. We might actually put redis in a separate container actually to not go too far to the extreme. We don't actually need cron and don't need any more of that cron stuff. We do need the entry point and we do need supervisor D. We're going to be running as root, which is not great at all. We'll address that in a video as well. And let's take out our entry point. So we're going to start the only thing that starts in the beginning is going to be the supervisor D process manager entry point .sh. So that's going to be a bin bash. We don't need the cron. We might add that in a bit, but since we don't need it for this demo, we'll leave it out. Let's make sure that that is executable. So remember, the objective here is to have the container start both Flask, so which is this command. We will be replacing that with Gunicorn or something like that because there's red warning here. And also the second process, which will be the cellery worker. And the third thing will be the redis queue. So let's get a supervisor config file. Hopefully there's a nice example in here. Yes, there is. So this will be worker one. I think there's an even better example. Calm computing cellery supervisor. There it is. Let's go for supervisor dconf. So this is like a raw minimal example. I say minimal, but it's got quite a lot of comments in. Comments are good, but a little bit overwhelming if there's too many. Okay, here we go. Oops, let's get that pasted nice and correctly. And here we go. So most of the interesting stuff is toward the bottom. Notice that most of it's commented out with the semicolon at the beginning. So, oh look, we've even got an example Redis built into this config already. So Redis, there it is, Redis, there it is. Okay, we will build Redis into this container. It's going to be what's called a fat container. A fat container is when you've got usually too much inside one container because it's generally a good idea to separate your concerns. Separation of concerns as a design pattern, but there's also simplicity as a design pattern as well. So we go back into our Docker file and shall we base it on Python? Yes, why not? That happens to be a Debian based image anyway as well. It's not going to be very small, but it's sufficient. There we go. In fact, the whole thing is fine. The whole thing is fine. I should have used this as the example to begin with. So what we're doing here, copying supervisor D, which is the config. We're doing the requirements, which may not exist yet. Let's check. Yes, it does. Good. And I'll keep that open a bit longer for the video. Cellery Flask Redis. There we go. And we've got our entry point. Let's compare that to this newer repo that we're now looking at as an example, which is just the same as here. No daemon, nice. Slightly less comments. Right, let's look at the supervisor because that's what's starting all of the programs. So when supervisor D starts over here, it's going to look at this program here, Flask. It's going to start Flask, very good. It's going to start cellery 2, that's great. It's going to start app 2, which we don't actually have. So we're not going to have that. And we're not going to have this app 1 either. So we're just going to have cellery, redis, and Flask. And the order is quite nice as well, because redis is needed by cellery, and then Flask is what adds the tasks to the background. Cool, let's save that. Let's do a Docker build now. Oh, I don't like this. It's not in the git ignore. Let's quickly fix that. Ignore so that we don't commit PyCache to a repo, which could be quite bad for leaking things that you don't want to leak, and also the VNV file as well. VNV, there we go. Right, great. So let's do a Docker build, Docker, or just do podman build because it doesn't need the Docker daemon running. We'll give it a tag as test, and we'll give the context as the current directory. So it's going to build all of this, including our main.py. I've noticed it's called main.py. I'm just going to check that our Flask run. So that probably won't work because Flask by default looks for a file called app.py. It doesn't have to be called app.py, but by default it looks for one called app.py. So that will help. Let's do a build again, just because I've made that change. Good, good, good. And once that's built, we're going to run it and view the standard out. A lot of work has been gone in, a lot of work, let's say, standard out, so that supervisor D logs to standard out somehow. I can't remember where that happens, but let's see. Maybe I didn't keep that in there. Let's see. Standard out. Maybe there, maybe not. We will find out when we run the container. So podman images, or just podman run, and the RM just means it will clean up afterwards and delete the container when it stops. And we'll say test. Supervisor D not found. Oh dear. Did I forget to put that in? Let's see. What's in the requirements.txt? Missing supervisor D. That's probably why. Here's the example. Requirements, supervisor. There we go. That's missing. Check I'm in the right folder as well. Where am I coding right now? Yeah, cool, that's fine. So I've got to build again, unfortunately. There we go. Thankfully, we've got some cache layers. Okay, good, good, good. And we've got Redis installing. So this is a fat container. It contains far too much than it should, but it's also simplicity because everything's in one. Okay, supervised is still not found. Entry point 4, line 4, which is there. Supervisor D. So we're looking in the bin directory for that. Let's have a look at our example Docker file here. Where am I missing the install of supervisor D? Not seeing it. we're doing the pip install here. Let's do the run of the container again, but this time we're going to override the entry point and look into bin bash with the interactive terminal so that we're inside the container now and we can have a look around. So we've got supervisor D. It does exist. Where is it? Ah, the directory has changed. That's why. So in our entry point, we're looking at that, but actually what we need is that. Use a local bin. There we go. Let's build that again. That's a really useful tip for being able to override the entry point so that you can go into the container and inspect what's going on inside of it. So just that was entry point. So we had Podman. Also, it's the same for Docker, so it doesn't matter whether it's Podman or Docker. We were doing Podman run RM, but we were overriding the entry point to bin bash, or if you've got an Alpine container, it's bin sh. And then we interactive terminal, and that drops you in with the name of the container. Great way to debug a container. Cool, let's see if that's built. Yes, it has. Let's run again. Now we're in the container. Oh, we don't need to override this time. We just want to start the container as normal without the override. So let's run that container. Nice, there we go. It's starting to run. We've got some errors, but that's fine. Cool. So let's now look at a bit of debugging to see, because we've got a bit further now. We've got supervisor starting. We can see cellery, sort of cellery starting. So everything's starting, but there's obviously something wrong because I've mixed two different repos together. Something to do with task. Probably looking at supervisor conf as well, just to see how it's starting. Tasks.worker, so that's not what I want. What I want is to look at the example from the other repo we were looking at and use that. Yes, because it's app probably rather than tasks.worker. And what we'll do is we'll use our entry point override to see if that's what we want. The module main was not found. That's understandable. Why? Because we renamed it to app. There we go. The syntax can be really confusing when starting cellery. Mostly because I haven't read the documentation very much. I've read it, but not very much. But it is described on the documentation what to do. So trying to connect to Redis, it can't connect to Redis. That's fine because it's not running. Is it running? Let's have a look. PSAUX. No, it's not running. Cool. But did we ask it to run? We did. By this here, Redis run server. Let's see. We're still in the container. Yeah, so it can start. Okay, but we override the entry point, which is why. But if we start now, the correct way will be good. We just need to make sure that we update the container cellery config, sorry, supervisor D config, so that it's called app rather than tasks worker. So we'll call that app because that's the name of the Python module called app.py here. And then when cellery looks inside here, and when we run a app, it's going in here, and cellery is finding this variable called cellery. That's why we put the word app there, because cellery is looking for this variable called cellery, and that's how it's finding it. Cool. Again, we've got to do another build because we've changed that. because we changed the supervisor config. Let's just check for a go audio. It looks like it's okay. That's building again. So by the end of this, we're going to have redis starting automatically, cellery starting automatically, and Flask starting automatically, all inside one container as a fat container. So we'll do the run now. We're not going to override the entry point. Here we go. Coming together. Still cannot import tasks. Did I miss something out? Let's do a good old grep. Way, but we don't want to grep the VNV directory, so we'll exclude dir VNV. There we go. I've still got it in there. I thought I got rid of that. Let's see. Tasks. App. That's what we want. Because on my other example I was copying from, Flask app was called tasks. See here, this file here? That's why I keep falling into that error. So in this instance, our application is called app.py and we've just renamed main to app. Cool. So maybe the last time we have to build now. Build. On the bright side, we can see that all the logs are appearing straight away. By default, supervisor D doesn't do that. You have to configure it in order for it to send logs to standard out. Okay. Great, that's built. Let's do a run now. It's a bit confusing having --rm, but remember that's just for tidying up the container. So when we stop, what Docker does is it deletes the container for you. So start again. We'll just have it scrolling so quickly. I'm going to scroll up. We can see that we've got it's running as root. It's got a big warning there, and understandably so. So it's spawned cellery, it's spawned Flask, spawned redis, and warnings. Warnings. Always read the warnings. So redis is running with default config. Flask is running. Cellery. I'm looking for things like Cellery has stopped or the application rather has failed. But at the moment we seem okay as a minimal process running. We need to address all of those warnings as well, but the generic process is looking good. So let's now go to the port 5000, which is what Flask will be looking at by default. And of course it's not listening yet because we've not exposed those ports. So let's do that. So we'll say -p, and we want to say 5000, 5000, and remember the extra zeros. Great. And we're going to run. There we go. And just like before in the previous video, we've got the task being added and the task succeeding. So we're doing all of those three things inside one container. All right, let's commit that and push it up and close that issue. So we're going to add the requirements, git add, git ignore, and we'll git add the Docker file, entry point, supervised config. And we're on that branch. No, we're not. Let's check out the branch, which I think is issue number 1. Yes, add Docker file. So there we go. Git commit message fix 1 added Docker file monolith example supervisor D. So git push origin 1. Oh dear, we're using that. Let's change the remote to SSH. Git remote remove origin, git remote add origin, git push origin main. There you go. Oh, we've got some changes that I've missed. Git rebase origin main. And let's go push. That's the wrong branch. Git push origin 1. Okay, that's all been pushed now. Let's create that pull request. And we'll reference the issue. And let's get that reviewed and merged. So have a look at the difference. Looks good, looks good, looks good, that's good. One thing is missing, of course, how to run as a container. So we want to say run as one container. So to run the entire application in a single container, that container, manually run each component. So now we can say how to run it, which is got with the example here in our history. It's usually faster to write documentation as you're building. And there we go. Alternatively, you can use Docker for that. Yank. Or Docker. Docker. There we go. And I didn't add the, let's call it example. Example. I didn't add the build step. So we need to add the build step, which is just that. Where's the README gone? There it is. Build. And run. And just to keep it consistent, last bit, or Docker. There we go. Git add readme, and that's the one update readme. So we've got that pushed, and we've updated the readme. That should be all right to go. Let's just take a look at it as an actual document. There we go. It's missing one more thing, which is how do you know that it's running correctly? So test running okay by visiting kernel / 127 0.0.0.1 by 1000. Then look at container logs. You should see the task being added and completed each time the page loads. So give a sample output, and sample output I might already have. No, I don't. So let's get one. Here we go. There's a task added. And then boom, boom, boom. There we go. And go back to the README. And what is that? Example logs, happy path. Happy path is when things go good. Sad path is bad. Git commit one added logs to README example. Wrong branch, git push origin 1. There we go. And we will see how that's done and then merge it in if I can find the correct repo. It's this one. There it is. All right. And we'll go in. There we go. That's much more useful now, I think, because we're getting a little bit more useful for a minimal deployment of a Flask or Django or any sort of Python app with a background task. So any kind of container runtime, whether that be Docker, Elastic Beanstalk, ECS, Kubernetes, Mesos, as long as you can deliver a container, that runtime will be fine. Now, Redis, usually you'd run that on its own instance, but there's also benefits in having it all contained in one, especially if the application you're dealing with doesn't have many visits or customers or things like that. So great to keep things all together, at least initially, for small companies. Okay.